if you really journal, treat it like a journaling exercise using the I statements, really check in with yourself. Like, that is a very powerful tool for improvement.
Welcome to the 7-Stage LSAT podcast. I'm Henry, joined with my host, Zishan. And what are we going to be talking about today?
Yeah, we've got an interesting topic here today. It's kind of, dovetails with the end of our conversation last week, which was about finding the principle behind questions, abstracting questions, really understanding questions on a deeper level. Basically put, when you get a question wrong, instead of thinking about, well, what specifically about this question did I get wrong? You want to ask yourself, if you're really aiming to improve on the LSAT, what is the skill, the principle, the concept here that I am missing? And newsflash, that concept applies to many, many questions. So the LSAT, is full of different skills and principles. But really, when you boil it all down, there's only a handful of those. And so every question, if you're getting it wrong, it's usually a misfiring of a specific skill or abstract concept. And that's what we're really getting at. I don't know if that makes sense, Henry. Does that land for you, or do you have thoughts?
No. I think that would make a ton of sense. I guess to go over like the minute details of a specific problem are more of the content or what the problem is about, right? So like you might say, okay, smoking and cancer are highly correlated. So conclusion, smoking causes cancer. Like the details of that question are about smoking and cancer. But what I'm hearing you say is really or I guess that's an argument. What we're concerned with is not so much the details or the content of it. We're concerned more of like a pattern or structure of that argument. In this case, right, we have a correlation in the premise and a causation in the conclusion.
Right.
But that same level of thinking can be applied to your own like how you think about a problem or why you picked a particular answer choice. Instead of thinking like, oh, I picked an answer choice that was wrong because I saw that this was about smoking, but actually smoking doesn't involve X, Y, and Z. You'd say, oh, actually, maybe I picked an answer that fell into a common flaw, right? Like some sort of comparative versus absolute issue.
Right.
And so you want to be thinking more along the lines of like, all right, what is the underlying structure of either the problem or the stimulus or the answer choice? Where am I connecting or where am I not connecting with that? Is that correct?
Yeah. I think it kind of makes me think, the content or the storyline of a given LR stimulus is really just a colorful backdrop against which you are playing with logic. And the logical play you do is going to be very similar for any question type of any subject matter. And to your point, Henry, that subject matter at the end of the day kind of becomes irrelevant. And we can take this all the way to the level of wrong answer journal, where, when you're doing your wrong answer journal, meaning you're going back and for every question you get wrong, you're explaining to yourself every single answer choice, maybe writing that down or typing it out. Instead of talking about explicitly the content, maybe try to ignore some of what the content or storyline was of an LR stimulus and just see that for what it is. These LSAT writers, I imagine what they do when they write the test is they think about all the logical maneuvers they'd like to test you on, and then they just come up with different scenarios to, let those logical maneuvers and rules play out. But the scenario is the afterthought. And so for you, like, I think this is what you're saying, Henry, for you, test taker, the scenario should also be an afterthought. The logic that you're playing with is the main thing. And if you ever get a question wrong, it's likely that it wasn't an issue with misunderstanding the scenario. Or perhaps what happened is the scenario was maybe confusing enough to distract you from what is actually simple logic underneath. And I think that's why most people get most questions wrong, is they get a little bit distracted or hoodwinked or befuddled by the complex language that paints a scenario, but the scenario is really just a backdrop. Anyway, I'm going on and on, but I think you're with me. Or is that kind of how you think about it?
No, I think that makes a ton of sense. I guess we could go into the details. Maybe we should go into an example of something that you might run into,
Yeah.
and maybe you get a question wrong, and you want to be thinking to yourself, okay, if I'm doing a wrong answer journal, I could be thinking about the content here, but let me actually think about the structure. Let's just go back to this idea, right, where we know that smoking is correlated with lung cancer, and so we say that smoking causes lung cancer, and maybe it's a weakening question, and you'd say like, all right, is this weakened by the fact that most people who smoke don't get lung cancer? Not to put you on the spot. The answer is no, right? Like the answer is no. It actually is totally fine. One of the things my philosophy professor is like took me for a ride here, which is
Uh-huh.
like most people who smoke don't get lung cancer, and most people who get lung cancer don't smoke. So smoking doesn't cause lung cancer.
Mm.
And actually, those premises aren't true today. They used to be true. Um, and it takes you for a bit of a ride there. But what I would say is that when we go back to that former example where we say like, okay, most people who smoke don't get lung cancer, that might look like it weakens, but it doesn't. And you might say like, oh, well, in this instance, right, the reason why this doesn't work out is because I know, yeah, most people who smoke don't get lung cancer, but it's still a higher percentage of people who smoke get lung cancer than people who don't smoke. And so that's why that this is a wrong answer. Right, but fundamentally, why that answer is wrong is because the way that answer choice is set up, is structured, it could never be wrong, or it could never be right, no
Hmm.
matter what the content is. Because if you want to establish that smoking does not cause lung cancer, you don't just need how many people who smoke don't get lung cancer. You
Right.
need to compare that with how many people who don't smoke don't get lung cancer, or with
Right.
anything. If you ever want to say that something is not a cause, or has no causal impact, you need to know about both groups, right? The groups that do the thing and the groups that don't do the thing. And so you'd want to extract that idea from that problem instead of thinking in terms of like, oh, smoking and lung cancer, what do I know about the world? I don't know. How does that sound reasonable
Yeah,
enough?
yeah, I get what you're saying. So basically, it would be nice if you came into these questions that involve, scientific or medical studies with a general, disposition or knowledge or whatever, demeanor that was like, if they're going to try to establish causation for anything, I better hope they have a control group. I better hope they're
Right.
comparing. I better hope that they are actually trying to eliminate every other variable that could be contributing to or causing this effect, right? It's like
Yes.
you need to kind of in your head know that like if you're going to tell me something causes something, these are my rules, right? These are my parameters. This is how much burden of proof I'm going to put on you, and I don't care about who does what or most people who do what or what. It's like
Yeah.
you're just giving me and again, that statistic, not to confuse anybody, but like it can play a role in supporting something down the line, but it by itself does nothing, right?
Yeah.
Y-
Uh,
I don't. Maybe I went too far there, but
no, no,
yeah,
I think you're exactly right. Where a lot of answer choices can be right if you add a lot more information to them.
right,
But the question
yeah,
is the answer choice right on its own?
right,
And I like what you're taking there, which is that forward look, right? Which is it's not enough that you just write in your wrong answer journal, this is what I messed up. The reason why we're looking for the structure here is you're not going to see another answer or argument or problem that uses those exact same words again, right? The
yeah,
content will be different, maybe slightly different, maybe very different, but the structure is going to be there. And so when you take out the structure, what you want to then do is make a plan for the next time you see that. So that's what you were talking about. The next time I see a sciency LR question and it seems like it's causal and they have a study, well, let me make sure I've got a control group. Let me make sure I'm comparing that control group to an experimental group. I know what I need in causation. I know how I would weaken this or not weaken this. And
right,
so I think that is a good thing to do because you want it, or distilling the like the skeleton of the problem is a good thing to do because you also need to make that plan. And it could be at the more minor level too. Maybe you do a wrong answer journal. Why did I pick this one answer? Oh, because I thought this answer choice was good if I assumed something else. And so you would say new plan in my wrong answer journal, or for the next time I'm either drilling or taking a PT or doing a section, I will not add anything to my answers. Right? Like refresh yourself and have a plan. Be like, all right, this is the thing I'm going to work on for this specific drill. or this specific PT, I'm going to tell myself that I will not add any additional information to my answer choice. I'm not going to help the answer choice out. And sometimes you get more questions right. Sometimes you get the same amount of questions right. But if you focus on that, then eventually it'll just be baked into your psyche, and then you can move on to the next thing. Um, so
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's a pretty good. I guess we could go into some. I don't know. Do you have any other patterns?
I was just going to mention before we get to other patterns that this also happens in RC. People make
Mm.
an inference that's just a bridge too far, and they get focused on the content of the passage, but really they're just making the mistake of just adding assumptions where you shouldn't be adding assumptions.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of another pattern. Henry, you're a lot better at the examples than I am. I feel like I'm
Yeah. Well, I mean,
always
I guess we
speaking
could
abstractly. Yeah,
speaking to the RC, a very common pattern. I mean, I'm sure we've talked about this before. Is like strength, where an answer choice in RC, if it's an inference question, might be very strong, and then versus a weaker answer choice. And generally speaking, the right answer choices will be written in a weaker way.
right.
And the reason why is that it's very easy to support a weaker statement. And so they don't want any question. They don't want anyone to question, like, this has to be the right answer. And so you could always say, like, well, what does it mean for something to be weak versus strong? You could say, like, okay, well, which would you rather prove? Would you rather prove that, or what would you rather bet on? All people like ice cream or not all people like ice cream?
Hmm.
What would you rather bet on?
Well, I would rather bet on not all because
Right.
to prove all, you'd have to find every person on Earth, right? And
Yes.
ask them whether they like ice cream, and they'd all have to answer yes.
Yes,
But to
exactly.
prove not all, you just got to find the one guy in your neighborhood and
Yes.
ask them whether they like ice cream. And if they say no, then your study is done, right?
Yeah, right. What you can think of there is that the way that is set up is that the barrier for proof is different between those two. Right? To prove that not all people like ice cream, you need to find one person that doesn't like ice cream, and then you're done. To
Yeah,
disprove that all people like ice cream, you need to find one. Right? So proving one statement takes one person, and disproving another statement takes one. And so it's a lot easier for not all people to like ice cream. And so you can apply that level of logic across a lot of RC questions or inference based questions. The same is true of like can versus will. To prove that something will happen means it's happening 100% of the time. To
right.
prove that something can happen, you only need to have it only needs to happen once or even be possible. So I think that is a pretty common pattern, and that's what you'd want to extrapolate. It's like, oh, why did I get this question wrong? Oh, because the right answer choice says, "Oh, you could run to the store," or the author thinks that the person could have ran to the store in time to save the baby. Versus the wrong answers that I picked said that the author, absolutely wills, run to the store. But based on the content here, it says like, "Oh, I can see why it maybe is possible that they definitely will." But what you would do there is you'd say, well, wait a minute here. Like, look at the differences between these two answer choices. Like, I'm never going to get a passage about running to a store to save a baby. I don't know. That was an off the cuff example,
Yeah,
right? You're never
sure.
going to get a passage about that. But what you will get is that option, where you have an option between an answer choice that is much easier to establish as true and one that's much harder. And so you're
Mm,
looking through that through line and saying, oh, I'm noticing this pattern here. Let me look for another. Keep that in mind when the next time I run this back. So yeah, I think RC there's a lot of that. RC is a little bit harder though to do. I think it's a little bit harder to wrong answer journal RC because there's a lot
yeah,
going
there's more
on in an RC
variables.
passage.
Yeah, but I like this line of thinking. I maybe this is like I'll pitch a title for this episode, which is like we're
Wow.
almost psychologizing the LSAT, or at least psychologizing the LSAT writers, where it's like you got to think through like what are they really testing me on, and know that the content is mostly a distraction. Maybe one provocation I'll give to you, Henry. You can answer this question because I usually tell a lot of students to not worry about parallel reasoning until kind of later in their studying. I tell them to skip parallel reasoning questions.
Mm.
But is it all parallel reasoning all the way down? In that, like, if are we really learning patterns of reasoning, and sort of apply and have developing maybe a bank of reasoning patterns, and then
Yeah.
approaching questions with that bank of knowledge? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I would say yes, probably.
Yeah.
What I think the skill that you need for parallel reasoning ends up being a much more intense skill than what you would need for like to do in your wrong answer journal.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
a lot of parallel questions where you're right, because ultimately we're looking for two arguments with the same structure, uh, but they are going to try to intentionally make those answers look as similar as possible. And so
Right.
it's definitely good to be thinking about the structure of the stimulus, but it's really hard to look at the particular answers and know. And I think you're right to say you skip those, leave them to the end. Whereas a lot of the arguments that they present to you uh, in a strengthening or a weakening question or a necessary assumption question, which is where most of the problems live, I guess flaw questions too. The structure is not intentionally difficult. It's more about it's just a difficult argument to parse through, but they're not like trying to deceive you on like what the premises are, what's the conclusion, are they flipping sufficient and necessary, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
At least in the stimulus. And so I think if you're going to be thinking about like overarching structure, definitely practicing some parallel questions, uh, easier parallel questions, I think is great. But I would just caution because like harder parallel. I mean, I'm sure you know it's like harder parallel questions are very hard even
Right.
for me. I mean, I think they're pretty difficult. It's not
Yeah.
exactly a good um, measure of like how most questions. It's kind of like main conclusion questions, right? Where main conclusion questions, you think, oh, these should be super easy. Isn't it fundamental that I know what the conclusion is in
Right.
a particular
So
argument?
you thought.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you thought, and like they just make the main conclusion questions harder to parse through and find the
Yeah.
conclusion than like a thing like strength. But I think you're, anyways, just to start back, I think you're definitely right. Like the concept behind parallel reasoning is definitely something that you want to be applying. I guess as a side note too, not to
Please. Yeah.
completely dominate this, is like
No, no, go ahead.
your
This is
life
great.
will be made so much easier if you learn to diagram. Like I cannot stress this enough that you have to learn to diagram.
Wait,
I don't
Henry,
even.
didn't we just say last episode that the highest scores don't diagram? Could you clarify
Well,
what
yeah.
what
To
do you
get,
mean? Yeah.
yeah. Well, as we mentioned in the last episode, right? In order to get to be the highest scorer, you have to go through a diagramming process.
Right.
There's no better way to learn argument structure and to stop thinking about content than to learn to put things on the left side of the arrow and on the right side of the arrow.
In
And
symbols, maybe. Yeah.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Uh,
Acronyms, even pictures.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yes. No, but it's true, right? It really is true. And so learning to diagram sentences out will help you so much at thinking about just the structure of the argument. Because ultimately, right, like at the end of the day, we're not looking, or you don't want to be thinking why two things pointing to the same necessary condition means there's no inference. Why is it that every apple being a fruit and every banana being a fruit means there's no overlap? Oh, well, fruit could be a lot of things and apples and bananas don't need to overlap. Like no, you just want to know that those things point to the same necessary, so there's no inference to be made. And so once you encounter another question that points two things to the same necessary but isn't as simple as apples and fruit, you just know that there's no inference to be made. Um, and yeah, so I just can't. I
Yeah, what a nightmare it would be to like every time you see a sufficient and necessary condition to think about the apple and fruit analogy
Yeah,
and be like, okay, I'm kind of seeing that this is in this category, but this is not in this category. It's like, okay, just diagram it, make it super simple. And to your point, Henry, the way I teach parallel reasoning, I think this is actually coming up. I'm maybe thinking a different way about parallel reasoning that maybe I should double down on it more, which is, you look at an argument and you abstract it. Like that's the first thing you have to do is understand what that argument is and abstract it. And one of the ways that you help yourself abstract it is to put it into conditional logic, or to diagram it, right? And then you can
yeah,
see the bare bones argument structure. Your task is then to find an answer choice with the same bare bones argument structure. But that middle step of like diagramming is absolutely essential for you to represent what that structure is in a simple enough way to where you're not like juggling concepts and categories in your head, but you have kind of like a very, what do you want to call it? Explicit like
yeah,
representation in symbols that you can then match.
yeah,
Then like you could show two diagrams to like a 3-year-old and they'd be able to tell you which two line up, right?
yeah.
So anyway,
Uh,
just affirming your point.
no,
Yeah.
no, that's exactly right. I mean, English, there's 100 different ways to say the same thing. Right? If it's an apple, then it's a fruit. All apples are fruit. It's an apple only if it's fruit. It's not an apple unless it's a fruit. No apples are not fruit. Right? Like all of those
Right.
mean the same thing. And so you want to say like, wait a minute, let's just make those be an arrow. And then once it's an arrow, you'll say like, okay, the English is it's not even English. And then as you mentioned, once you put it into symbol, once that arrow goes down, you start seeing these things less in terms of apples and fruit, more like there is a symbol that says apple, and there's a symbol that says fruit, instead of thinking about the concept of apples and fruit, which is really great for these conditional reasoning. I guess we're just talking about conditional reasoning, but we're doing a question the other day in this class, and it's great because one of the inferences that you can make is that extroverts are shy. And it's
Mm.
weird because, like, if you don't diagram that, there's just this intuition, or I think it was like all extroverts are shy or something like that. It's like there's an intuition you have that there's no way that could be, right?
Yeah.
Like extroverts are shy, but if you just do the logic and you view shyness as some sort of abstract symbol and an extrovert as some sort of abstract symbol, you'll have no problem making that inference.
Mm.
So, yeah, just to circle back, it's like structure is everything. I guess, yeah. How does this relate to the wrong answer journal again? I guess we're just talking about
No, yeah.
looking at structure.
Well, I think that's maybe a good place to go with this is like now that you know that the content is there as just a little fun backdrop for you to play with logic, or at worst, like what you were saying, uh, something designed to tug at your intuitions and mess you up. Like you might, assume that experts are never shy, but this problem hinges on you drawing out the assumption that extroverts are shy. Um, when you go to your wrong answer journal, you will be tasked to, write out the stimulus in your own words, summarize it. What is this argument? But instead of focusing on the content, make a note to yourself that the structure of the argument is as follows. And then when
Mm,
you look at the answer choices, talk about in your journal whether they speak to the structure or not. Try to move yourself away from the content of the scenario. And when you and I think one thing everybody should do in the wrong answer journal before they start discussing answer choices is put the stimulus in their own words. And maybe one way to put it in your own words is to put it into a structural representation where you take out the content and you really nail down what this argument is, what the underlying argument structure is that could appear in many different scenarios, not just this one. I think that's maybe your step one, main step. And then with each answer choice, you know, basically stick in that same framework,
yeah,
and talk about how each one relates to the structure. But I think what our prescription here is to get your wrong answer journals to be a little less content focused,
yeah,
and maybe you look more like diagram wrong answer journals than like written out paragraphs, if that
yeah.
makes sense. Yeah.
No, that makes a ton of sense. And then in the additional layer there, like make sure you draw a lesson or a proscription or a proscription or a prescription or a proscription, yeah, prescription or a proscription, geez, from that, right? Like I will not do this thing in the next question when I see this structure, or I will do this thing in the next question when I see this structure. Oh, look, I have a bunch of conditionals. The thing I will do is I will make sure that I know what I want the sufficient side to be, what I want the necessary side to be, and I won't flip
Yeah.
the two, right? Or I won't just pick an answer choice that mentions the two concepts that I want to link. I'm going to confirm that it goes the right direction. Uh, oh,
Yes.
I see a phenomenon in the premises. I see a hypothesis in the conclusion, and I'm trying to weaken this. I'm going to be aware of alternative explanations. Can something else explain this phenomenon? I'm going to hunt for that first before I look at anything else. Okay, it's right there. What I won't do is like I'll just come up with an or I won't just try to like look for an independent reason why the conclusion is wrong, because usually what they end up doing is they try to like get at the reasoning. Okay, nice.
Yeah. Yeah. I think maybe that's one final lesson to take home, which I love that you said it so explicitly, because people should write it out. Like you said, use the I statements. Like, one thing I will say is a great way to improve on this test is to really talk to yourself, really check in with yourself. I will do this. I won't do this. Next time, I'm going to make sure to do this. I got tricked by this. I did not quite understand this. Now I know it better. If you really journal, treat it like a journaling exercise using the I statements, really check in with yourself. Like, that is a very powerful tool for improvement. So I just want to say I love that you did it like that, Henry, because I actually think students should literally do their wrong answer journals like a journal, and really talk to themselves, really check in with themselves,
I
first person,
statements.
I statements.
So
I think that's
so
a great
wise.
way
Yeah.
to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I did for many. As like every time I see many, I'm gonna think two. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
That was one of my. I mean, I was not exactly a diligent wrong answer journaler, but I would always come up with like little like things I need to do in the future. Like every single time I did a question, it's like many equals two. That's what I would
Yeah.
always tell myself. Or
Yeah.
whatever. Things like that. So I guess we can wrap it up.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening. Like, comment, subscribe, follow the Instagram.
Yeah, send questions, either comment on YouTube or email us or comment on Instagram. If we pick your question to talk about in a podcast, you'll get a free month of live. So
Wow,
please
3 months.
engage with us. Yeah,
It's a lot of value there.
a lot of value.
Except for those of the fee waiver, in which case you already have 7 Sage for a very cheap month.
Right.
So yeah, I will see you guys, or we'll all see you guys in the future. Talk
We
to you
will.
soon.
Take care.
Peace.